the gap, standing for Jesus. Standing in the gap for family and friends. Standing in the gap, one love for all, so we all can make it in.
Called the Gap News, and the Gap News is basically here because so much is happening in this world today, and God wants us to be able to interact and deal with what happens in the world on His Word. First, you got to study His Word to know what it is, but then you have to apply it in this world. And there's so much turmoil going in the world at this time. You need to know how God wants you to react, and God wants you to do it. Not be fooled by the actions of others. And that's why I put Micah 6:8 up there all the time. Understand, He's a God of justice, God of mercy, and you need to follow Him. And so, when we started this, we said, okay, we want to keep people up to date on what's going on in current event. Man, there's so much going on in current event. And as I try to study the Bible and teach from the Bible and all that kind of stuff, so we turned this Gap News over to Marvel. She's been doing a wonderful job on it, but as I kept asking her, I said, wow, with all this going, what are you going to show the people? Gap News. Well, she's got it. So I'm turning it over to her. Gap News.
Well, remember last week I said, I got so much going on. And we were saying, should we show this? Should we show that? And I said last week, I'm going to just wait because I think I'm going to have some really good Gap News this week. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Our favorite former president and his antics. Here we go.
We've got a verdict. Ari Melber.
We are looking at count 1, guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. Count 4, guilty. Count 5, guilty. Those are the first 5 counts coming out of this jury, finding Donald J. Trump guilty on the first 5 felony counts. Reading the rest as we are getting it from our court reporters.
Starting with count 6.
Count 6, guilty. Count 7, guilty. Count 8, guilty. And you'll see on the screen we're tracking ahead. Count 9, guilty. Count 10, guilty. Count 11, guilty. Count 12, guilty. Count 13, guilty. Count 14, guilty. Count 16, guilty. Count 17, guilty. Count 18, guilty. Count 19, guilty. Count 20, guilty. Count 21, guilty. Count 22, guilty. Count 23, guilty. Count 24, guilty. Count 25, guilty. Count 26, guilty. Count 27, we're seeing that on the screen, guilty. Count 28, guilty. Those are the first 28 felony counts here as read by the jury. Count 29, guilty. Count 30, guilty. Count 31, guilty. Count 32, guilty. Count 33 and 34, guilty. That is Donald J. Trump, defendant in New York versus Donald Trump, found guilty on all 34 felony counts. That is the verdict here in this case.
Rachel?
Listen, it's a unanimous jury verdict, unanimous on all counts. This is a definitive and, this is an irreducible verdict. He can appeal. I'm sure he will appeal. But this is everything that the prosecution asked for from a jury that, by all accounts, took this thing very, very seriously. We counted the deliberation hours down here. Mm-hmm. The test here for us as a country is not about what happens on appeal and is not about what happens in sentencing. The test for us now as a country is whether or not this former president and his allies will have succeeded in trying to undermine the rule of law so that people reject this as a legitimate function of the rule of law in our country. They have tried to delegitimize this judge. They have tried to delegitimize this court. They have tried to delegitimize these proceedings. They've even tried to delegitimize the laws that he was charged under. Those efforts are the tests that we now have as a country. The people involved in bringing this case have been threatened and intimidated and had everything brought to bear on against them in a way that was designed to delegitimize this process in the eyes of the American people. It is now in the hands of the American people to decide if we will accept those efforts or whether we will stand by the rule of law and recognize this as a fair proceeding.
A wise woman said a few nights ago, 2 Mondays ago, that the rule of law is mortal. It needs to be protected. It isn't an abstract thing. And today, the people have names that we've all come to know. They're named Joshua Steinglass. They're named Alvin Bragg. They're named Susan Hoffinger.
Yeah. And there are other cases that are pending against Donald Trump as a criminal defendant. The difference is that we now know as a country what it is to put a former president on trial and to see that trial to fruition. That is something that was hypothetical before we ever had this guy as a former president. But now we have lived through it, and we know that the court process can work. A defendant who is a former president can be tried as a normal defendant. Again, the appeals process will go on. The sentencing process will go on, and those will all be pressure points. But the legal system in this country treats any former president as any citizen. We've seen that today, and this jury deserves to be thanked for their efforts and to be protected from the kinds of attacks and intimidation and recrimination that the president and his allies have tried to bring down on this process.
Let me just tell folks what's happened. What Ari said or Andrew said would happen has happened. Judge Merchan went juror to juror to juror. They all concurred with the verdict that Donald Trump is guilty on all 34 criminal counts, 34 felonies. And they have been thanked for their service, Ari.
Yeah, what you just reported and what Rachel was reminding us is actually existing in a microcosm within the trial because the jury is being polled, a jury of the peers of the defendant, as is his right. So that's legally something where the defense counsel is asked, do you want to make sure? They almost always, virtually always say yes. And so we're told, and we're looking at our notes here, pardon me for looking down, but our reporters are seeing the defendant, Donald Trump, is looking at the jury, is watching them as they are individually polled. But this is, as Rachel reminded us, someone who has been held in contempt for what he has said and done against other people and witnesses in the system. So I would call that a fairly intense moment, but good for the jury and good for the system to go right through it. Our reporters also telling us that while Trump has rarely shown emotion or changed his, quote, demeanor throughout the trial right now, he's only looking down. Eric Trump reportedly looking upset. And that's the scene in the room as they go through it.
Sure. When you say poll the jury, what you mean is individually, jurors by number will be asked, is this your verdict? And then they each have to answer orally. They have to say out loud, yes.
Yes, and that's the transparency. It's got to
be a scary moment for those individual jurors.
Right, as they're being stared down. But it's a transparency in our system. You said something so important. The system worked. We discussed earlier when we were awaiting this that it works not because of the result, but because of the process. And that if it were an acquittal, we would be discussing that the system went forward. This is that system, and the judge and the bailiffs and others are there to protect the people and protect them in a physical sense as needed. But what we are hearing is that this jury heard the evidence, asked these questions. We know some of what was on their minds. We haven't heard from them other than the verdict, and now are confirming that this is their unanimous verdict. And so it's a matter of transparency that everyone sees each of them confirm what was officialized today, that Donald Trump is guilty, that all 12 jurors unanimously reached that decision through their reasoning with each other on all 34 counts.
Andrew.
Just to Rachel's point, there is something in every trial when the jury is polled that is sort of magical and fundamental to this country, where the jurors, each one stands up and counts as a citizen. And these are people who have everyday lives. They didn't ask to be here. And that moment where the country this is what the country stands for. This is what the rule of law means. And jurors take it so seriously. And yes, it can be scary because of it, but you know what? They did their job. And I think that this is a testament to our joining so many other democracies in the international community who have managed to hold political leaders to account. And we have shown that we can do that as well in a fair process where the defendant got extremely good counsel, had an incredibly fair process from this judge in spite of his attacking the witnesses, the judge's family, the jurors. everybody did their job. And finally, on a small bore, Alvin Bragg, both personally was attacked. He was vilified for saying no to this case when he first took office, and people said, that how could he do that? And he said, after he said it wasn't ready. And this is a real vindication for him that he said, I'm going to bring it when it is ready and if it is ready. And then he brought it. And it's a real testament that he said, yes, now I think this case could be brought. And he did. And I think everyone understood from the moment David Pecker took that stand. I think a lot of people, including myself, reevaluated this case and said, you know what, I understand this is not just hush money. This was about fundamentally changing the 2016 election. That was the goal here. And clearly the jurors believed that.
Sue.
I'm also just now thinking about the E. Jean Carroll case when the judge at the end told the jurors that jury was anonymized. And he said, forget you were here in substance. And now today the judge has actually said that they can discuss the case if they like. The choice is theirs, but they no longer are barred from discussing it. And he's actually also asked to meet with them to discuss their work, not to discuss the case, but to discuss their work. So we don't know what time these jurors are going to get out of the building tonight, but he's going to sit down with them. And then after that, I imagine they're going to hear from pretty much every reporter that has been covering this. Hundreds of reporters will descend on them to try and get them to talk about the inner workings of that jury room.
Is Vaughn Hilliard still with us? Vaughn, just tell me
hey,
what
Nicole. I think
what's going on down there.
Yeah, I think part of this is what is going to take place from here on out. We're 5 months from the November election, and we talked about what a guilty verdict could mean to the stakes of this election. Donald Trump is repeatedly called November 5th the most important day in American history. That is election day coming up. And for him, this only increases the stakes. Number one, these are state charges here. We do not know what his sentence will be. If he'll just be fine, probation, or whether he will be facing jail time. That is going to be the determination of Judge Merchan. And when you look at the election, of course, the expectation is that if you were to win the White House, that prison sentence, if you were to get one, would be suspended or whatever the punishment is here. But for Donald Trump, he has already sent out a fundraising video in the last 24 hours to his supporters that they were going to be throwing him in jail here in New York. And so for him, he has every intention of using this to his a political advantage to the extent he can. And I think the first statement to come from any of his family members since this verdict was issued, I think is an example of that. That would be Don Jr., who was not here at the courthouse today. He was here yesterday. Eric Trump was inside the courtroom, currently still is. And I just want to read for you Don Jr.'s tweet, if I could. Quote, guilty on all counts. The Democrats have succeeded in their years-long attempt to turn America into a third world expletive. November 5 is our last chance to save it. I read that last line. November 5 is our last chance to save it because Donald Trump himself on the campaign trail has repeatedly suggested that the end of America is near if they does not take back the White House. From our team of reporters and they say Donald Trump, the defendant, has been seated inside of that courtroom, stoic, stone-faced. He looked at each of the jurors as they walked out, all 12 of those New Yorkers, as they walked out of the courtroom. This is somebody who is still seated in a straightforward position, understanding the political stakes now that he has been found guilty of these 34 felony counts here in New York.
Out of respect for Judge Merchan in the process, that I did exactly that. And the jury respects Judge Merchan, and I believe a lot of the antics that went on in the courtroom, whether it was by Blanche or by Donald himself with the eye closing, the leaning back, the total disregard for the jury, I don't think he engendered any positive feelings by anyone.
Did you feel like him? I mean, some people said he was sleeping. Some people said he was resting his eyes. I don't know. There was a lot of different interpretations about what he was doing. Your interpretation of it in the room was that he was being disrespectful to the jury?
Yes, but I was also not concentrating too much on him as I was trying to keep track of Todd Blanche's meandering questioning. That was very different. It go from 2016 to 2018, 2019, 2020, and trying to keep track of the dates and the events when you have that type of a meandering questioner is not an easy process.
Did you, and Daniel, I'll put this to you as well, in preparing for that cross-examination from Todd Blanche, did you prepare emotionally as well as factually? It seemed like from us just watching it, being in the courtroom and from our reporters and looking at the transcript, it seemed like it was a Herculean effort to just stay calm and even keel in what seemed to be designed to provoke you and to confuse you.
A lot of our prep certainly focused on the facts, making sure, there was so much prior testimony and interviews and statements. So we wanted to be up to speed on that, refreshed.
That's not an advantage when your client has spoken a lot in public.
He has. But it was important, and I emphasize this to Michael, and he handled himself remarkably well. But I wanted him to understand that his demeanor mattered and that he needed to maintain the same type of affect and composure on direct as on cross, as on redirect and on recross. And he did that. And I think I saw a connection between him and the jury. They believed him, and I think they were just with him. And so it was, yes, there was a lot of emotion involved. Painful for me as his lawyer to watch the attacks on him, the constant, 85 times he was called a liar in the summation by Todd. He's not a liar. Nobody's a liar. No one's a truth teller. He has told lies, and he admitted to it. And the jury believed him, and they returned the swift and just verdict. And so I think all the preparation was put to good use.
What Dania's describing there about the strategic necessity of you staying cool and having that same affect and everything, how hard was it?
Not hard at all. It's the media that wants to portray me as this sort of bombastic character. It's really not my nature.
We've all heard bombast from you.
But you've heard it from my Mea Culpa podcast or Political Beatdown podcast. It's a persona for it. Now, I can't go with intelligence, so I have to go with bombastic, right?
This is a case where if they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone. These are bad people. These are, in many cases, I believe, sick people. When you look at our country, what's happening where millions and millions of people are flowing in from all parts of the world, not just South America, from Africa, from Asia, from the Middle East, and they're coming in from jails and prisons, and they're coming in from mental institutions and insane asylums. They're coming in from all over the world into our country. And we have a president and a group of fascists that don't want to do anything about it because they could right now, today, he could stop it. But he's not. They're destroying our country. Our country is in very bad shape. And they're very much against me saying these things. They want to raise your taxes by 4 times. They want to stop you from having cars with their ridiculous mandates that make it impossible for you to get a car or afford a car. But make it very possible for China to build all of our cars. It's a very serious problem that we have. We just went through one of many experiences where we had a conflicted judge, highly conflicted. There's never been a more conflicted judge. Now, I'm under a gag order, which nobody's ever been under. No presidential candidate's ever been under a gag order before. I'm under a gag order, nasty gag order, where I've had to pay thousands of dollars in penalties and fines and was threatened with jail. Think of it. I'm the leading candidate. I'm leading Biden by a lot, and I'm leading the Republicans to the point where that's over. So I'm the leading person for president, and I'm under a gag order by a man that can't put 2 sentences together, given by a court, and they are in total conjunction with the White House and the DOJ, just so you understand. This is all done by Biden and his people. Maybe his people more importantly. I don't know if Biden knows too much about it, because I don't know if he knows about anything. But he's nevertheless the president, so we have to use his name. And this is done by Washington, and nobody's ever seen anything like it. So we have a judge who's highly conflicted. You know what the confliction is. Nobody wants to write about it, and I'm not allowed to talk about it. If I do, he said, I get put in jail. So we'll play that game a little bit longer. We won't talk about it, but you're allowed to talk about it. I hope you do, because there's never been anybody so conflicted as this. As far as the trial itself, it was very unfair. We weren't allowed to use our election expert under any circumstances. You saw what happened to some of the witnesses that were on our side. They were literally crucified by this man who looks like an angel, but he's really a devil. He looks so nice and soft. People say, oh, he seems like such a nice man. No, unless you saw him in action. And you saw that with a certain witness that went through hell. And when we wanted to do things, he wouldn't let us do those things. But when the government wanted something, they got everything. They got everything they wanted. It was a rigged trial. We wanted a venue change where we could have a fair trial. We didn't get it. We wanted a judge change. We wanted a judge that wasn't conflicted. And obviously he didn't do that. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. It's a very sad thing that's happening in our country. And it's a thing that I'm honored. In a way, I'm honored. It's not that it's pleasant. It's very bad for family. It's very bad for friends and businesses. But I'm honored to be involved in it because somebody has to do it. And I might as well keep going and be the one. But I'm very honored to be involved because we're fighting for.
We're going to continue to monitor Donald Trump and his remarks. He's making very, very strong statements, and we're going to have a fact check on those statements coming up shortly. Daniel Dale is standing by. Aaron, we're listening to the former president of the United States say, and I'm quoting him now, "We are living in a fascist state." He refers to the trial as a scam, a rigged trial. He says he would have loved to have testified. He could have testified. It was his decision not to testify. He said, quote, "I would have loved to have testified." And then he went after some of the witnesses, including Michael Cohen, for example, potentially a violation of the gag order that has been imposed by the judge against him. Aaron, we're going to continue to listen to what the former president has to say, but clearly, without a teleprompter, he's going off the cuff. He's railing against almost everything.
Yeah, and Wolf, you know, the fascist state, of course, the line that stands out. But as you point out, the other key, off the teleprompter. So it is very much off the cuff. So you're getting a rant and a reliving of the case and how he sees it. But then these sort of cul-de-sacs, right? Talking about polls or talking about his role or taking on a witness or talking about electric vehicles. I mean, it is very disjointed in the presentation. Wolf, I'll also say, in addition to the fascist state, it is very clear from what he said at the beginning, he doesn't want to go to jail. And that was clear, which also raises the question of whether what he just said about Michael Cohen, who he did not name by name, but made it clear who he was and called him a sleazebag, is a violation of that gag order. Wolf, as you know, the judge has said one more violation is jail time. So that'll raise that question as well as he's speaking without a teleprompter.
Yeah, he's just railing against almost everything involved in this case in which he was found guilty, 34 felony charges, criminal charges, very significant development. Unanimous decision by the 12 members of the jury. Daniel Dale, our fact checker, Aaron, is with us as well. And I want to go to Daniel right now. Daniel, you do this all the time following a Trump statement, a Trump speech. You review some of the lies that have been going on.
A whole bunch of lies here, Wolf. So he repeated the one I think he's repeated most frequently throughout the course of the trial and now after, saying this was all done by Biden and his people. The case was in conjunction with the White House and DOJ. Not a shred of evidence of that. This case was brought by a locally elected, yes, Democratic prosecutor. No evidence whatsoever of any communication with Joe Biden or his aides about it. He also repeated his claim from earlier this week that he said the judge wouldn't let them use an election expert under any circumstances. The judge knocked him out. Now, he did sort of clarify this after, but here's the real clarification. The judge did not bar the testimony of this expert, Brad Smith. Trump's defense was permitted to call him, but didn't. The judge did limit the scope of the testimony, saying he couldn't opine on whether Trump broke the law or not, couldn't analyze federal election law, but did not say the expert could not be used. And Trump also repeated his claim, Wolf, that crime in New York is at levels nobody's ever seen before. As anyone who lived through the early 1990s in New York knows, that is not remotely true. For example, murders in in New York. There were 391 last year. Well, there were 2,262 in 1990, so not even close, and it's further come down this year. And lastly, Wolf, former President Trump said that Michael Cohen got in trouble with the law for stuff that had nothing to do with him, Trump. He said, oh, it was Cohen's taxi medallion business and so on. Well, that is misleading at best because, yes, Cohen did get in trouble for lying about his taxes, lying about things related to the taxi medallion business, but also got in trouble for campaign finance offenses related to the very same hush money scheme that Trump got in trouble for. So directly related to Trump, and his prison sentence, Wolf, was also related to Cohen lying to Congress related to negotiations or discussions with Russia about a proposed Trump Tower project in Moscow. So this was not, Cohen's own thing, nothing to do with Trump. Some of it, at least, was directly related to the former president.
In some ways, the most revealing moment amid all the reaction to Donald Trump's conviction yesterday, which really flew under the radar, was an exchange online between one moderate Republican and the Trump campaign worker. It started with former Maryland Republican Governor Larry Hogan. He's now running for Senate in that state, and he left office, very popular in Maryland, a very blue state, and his presence in the race as a Republican nominee creates a real issue for the Democrats. It expands the map for Republicans. Democrats now have to spend money on that race. Obviously, a guy like that is going to have to distance himself from Trump, who's very unpopular in Maryland. And so he sent out a very carefully worded post saying, quote, regardless of the result, I urge all Americans to respect the verdict and the legal process. And you see how deft this was when you look at the timestamp, 4:52 p.m., right in the sweet spot, minutes after it was announced that a verdict had been reached, but several minutes before the verdict was read. This was the response Larry Hogan received from a top Trump campaign official, Chris LaCivita. You just ended your campaign. You, Republican governor, who dared to speak the very basic American tenet before a verdict, we should respect the legal process. You are done. This was just part of the sort of mob-style pressure campaign on Republicans to stand behind the felony convicted candidate. Here's Laura Ingraham on Trump TV.
I can't help but notice, and maybe it's changed over the last few minutes, of the people who haven't come out to condemn what happened in Lower Manhattan. Haven't heard from Mitch McConnell again, unless it was in the last 20 minutes. Mitch McConnell stands up with the rule of law and all these great judicial picks, and silence.
Well, lo and behold, almost an hour and a half later, Mitch McConnell dutifully put out his statement. These charges never should have been brought in the first place. I expect the conviction to be overturned on appeal. This enforcement operation is happening because the Trump people and the Fox people and most of the people in the upper echelons of the party understand the only way to really bring Trump down to end his political career is if Republicans turn against him. As long as they stay unified, no matter what he does, no matter how abhorrent or how dangerous or how criminal or how vile, no matter how much of a threat he is to the nation, if they all band together, then in a polarized landscape, they can basically keep him afloat and make it essentially a coin toss. That is why they dressed up like him during the trial, have rushed to debase themselves in cringe-inducing fashion on any live TV camera they can find.
So this is like the Soviet-style thing. Show me the person and I'll show you the crimes.
This was a political smear job. This was an attack job. This is what you see in banana republics.
This is the quintessential show trial. This is what you see in communist countries. This is the most outrageous travesty I've ever seen. And the problem here is Democrats have crossed this line.
This is a justice system that hunts Republicans while protecting Democrats. This was certainly a hoax, a sham.
Brian, yesterday was a sad day for America. You had a partisan witch hunt in New York. This is a total travesty. I mean, we should not mince any words here. This is an extremely dangerous day for our country.
Do we want to become a country where we try to jail our political opponents?
The justices on the court, I know many of them personally, I think they're deeply concerned about that as we are. So I think they'll set this straight.
There have only been two times in Trump's political career where that dynamic of Republican unanimity is broken, where Trump was near political death. So one was in the aftermath of January 6th, the violent assault on the Capitol that he stirred up, when everyone was criticizing him, when the blood was still on the floor of the Capitol, including Lindsey Graham and Kevin McCarthy. Remember that? Trump's approval rating dropped below 40%, just about the lowest level it reached. Mitch McConnell was testing the waters for a vote for an impeachment conviction. If it had not been for that man, Mitch McConnell's abject, enduringly pathetic cowardice, and McCarthy's relentless quest to have the third shortest speakership in history, not to mention the legitimate fear Republican senators had for their families about violence, we wouldn't have this issue now. They could have just voted to convict him and bar him from future office. Done. Ironically enough, the other time, the other sort of near political death experience was in the wake of the Access Hollywood tape, when just about every elected Republican tried to distance themselves and criticize him. Republican National Committee Chair Reince Priebus was even considering how to get him off the ticket. But Trump managed to hold things together, due in no small part to the fact that right at that moment, he got a guy named Michael Cohen, his lawyer, to pay to keep the porn star from talking. And so the Republicans never heard about that story, nor did the public, which could have been the political death blow. The lesson he learned is, if you enforce this totalitarian unanimity, you can keep chugging along. It's a wildly dangerous lesson, because they will do this no matter what he does and no matter how bad it gets.
And let's listen to what the president is saying here.
Good afternoon. Before I begin my remarks, I just want to say a few words about what happened yesterday in New York City. The American principle that no one is above the law was reaffirmed. Donald Trump was given every opportunity to defend himself. It was a state case, not a federal case, and it was heard by a jury of 12 citizens, 12 Americans, 12 people like you, like millions of Americans who served on juries. This jury is chosen the same way every jury in America is chosen. It was a process that Donald Trump's attorney was part of. The jury heard 5 weeks of evidence, 5 weeks. And after careful deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. They found Donald Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts. Now he'll be given the opportunity, as he should, to appeal that decision just like everyone else has that opportunity. That's how the American system of justice works. And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict. Our justice system has endured for nearly 250 years. And it literally is the cornerstone of America, our justice system. The justice system should be respected, and we should never allow anyone to tear it down. It's as simple as that. That's America. That's who we are. And that's who we'll always be, God willing.
I did my job. Our job is to follow the facts and the law without fear or favor. And that's exactly what we did here. And what I feel is just gratitude to work alongside phenomenal public servants who do that each and every day in matters that you all write about and make the press, and in lots of matters that you don't. I did my job. We did our job. Many voices out there. The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
That was a little bit long. I think it's probably our longest Gap News, but I wanted to put the whole thing together. So we heard from Trump. We heard the reading of the verdicts, 34 counts, found guilty unanimously by a jury of his peers. It was very interesting to me to hear Trump say, no former president has ever had a gag order. Honey, why has no former president ever had a gag order?
That's not been necessary.
Right. No other president has ever been convicted or indicted. The reason for that is because they did not commit these crimes. It was great to hear Alvin Bragg. They said that when the jury announced the verdict, there was no high-fiving, there was no celebration or anything like that. They just got up and left. They did, like he said, we did our job. I'm waiting to see if anybody online has any comments, but what say you?
You means me?
Yes, you.
Wow.
You.
I have two comments. And well, three. One of them is about our Ephesians 6:12, talking about our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but the rulers and authorities and powers of this dark world, which you could say is a direct reference to Donald Trump and his minions, and against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms, which means those people are controlled by the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly realms. And also, you know, there was something Martin said. He said the universe, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And so, you know, this is a guy who has they called him Teflon Don. He's been skirting under the law, violating the law for years and years and years, and sooner or later it's gonna catch up to you. And it caught up to him the other day, and now he wants to fight against it and all that. And then he used this word. He called the Biden and them fascists. Did you see that? Did you see what he said? He said,
Well, that's projection.
He said, let me tell you what fascism, the definition. It is a far right, authoritarian, ultra nationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in natural social hierarchy, subordination of individual interests for the perceived good of the nation or race, and strong regimentation of society and the economy. Now, if you had to say, who does that resemble, Biden or Trump? I mean, you'd almost have to say Trump. And you know what? The problem with him is that everybody knows that he's a liar. And what makes me feel good, and maybe this is being a little sarcastic, but the ones who are standing up against him are black people and women. And I'm talking about the ones who have the authority.
You sound like the prosecutors.
And Bragg down there. You got Fannie. You got the Attorney General up in New York.
Tisha James.
And all that. Black people are right there doing it. That's not to say, you know, you got the special counsel. I understand that. And well, we got the judge in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in D.C. and all that. So, and it's just ironic because Donald Trump and his family have had a history of racism and discrimination and all that. All you gotta do is look it up. And so it bothers me when I see black people stand up for him, saying that he's right, or you know, he's the best answer and all that kind of stuff. Look at the history. Come on now, let's not be stupid. Anyway, that's what I got to say.
Well, we certainly are in a new phase of our history. Something unprecedented in the history of America happened this week. Although one of the newscasters mentioned other countries have had to hold their former leaders to account for the crimes that they've done. Corruption, bribery, all kinds of different things. Netanyahu right now in Israel, he's being held to account. He's got a case right now. That's why he's trying to, you know, finagle his way out of going to prison. But the bottom line is that I was so gratified to see the rule of law, which is what is the foundation of our Constitution. It held. It held.
All right. very good Gap news, very long Gap news, but very good Gap news. And like I said, there's certain things you just can't avoid. I mean, you can't ignore. And what happened in New York with this conviction is something that we have to deal with as a Christian. And so we have to understand the spiritual warfare part of it. And hopefully people do. But
I just wanted to let you know, Sister Michelle said that was a great Gap news. It makes me sad to hear so many in Congress supporting a man like Donald Trump to lead our nation. I'm so grateful that our world still belongs to our God. Amen to that. Amen to that.
Amen.